you were going to ask, why is it happening? Well, it's happening because I've been talking for 30 years and writing for 30 years. There are very few people control the world. Very few people. People will be staggered how few. The thing is that what is freedom of speech? It's the freedom to speak. So I read a politician today saying, I agree with freedom of speech, but there are limits. Well, there's no freedom of speech then. Freedom of speech is the freedom to speak. If anyone's not allowed to speak, then it's not freedom of speech, it's freedom to conform to certain parameters of what are acceptable. And then what that's doing is giving power to some authority to decide what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And as we see, and we're seeing it massively now, once you give that power to an authority, it then starts interpreting what can and cannot be said in a way that squeezes and squeezes and squeezes more and more of what cannot be said. This is what political correctness is about. What is political correctness? It's simply manipulating the target population to silence itself, so those in authority don't have to. It's ridiculous. Now, people say, well, you say that people can say anything. Well, yes, I do, and I'll tell you why. There are laws against incitement to racism, incitement to hatred, incitement to violence. There are laws against that.
Are they laws you agree with?
Yeah, and if people use their freedom of speech to incite those things, then there are laws to deal with that, and those laws should deal with it. What I'm saying is, once you start censoring freedom of speech at the point of delivery, or even more sinister, before the point of delivery, by banning people from the right to have access to the communication networks or speak in public, that is what the fascists do. What did fascists do in Nazi Germany? What does any tyranny do? It wants to silence those that are exposing the tyranny and have a different version of events to the tyranny. So what did the Nazis do? They burnt the books. They banned the meetings of people who were exposing the Nazis. And now in this inverted world, we have people who call themselves progressives, and they seem to have this extraordinary self-delusion that progressive mentality has something to do with being liberal, when it's not. It's the opposite of liberal. They are the ones that claim to be wanting people to be inclusive and to have diversity.
But maybe on their terms.
When they're destroying diversity, and they have become the new tyranny. They have become the new Nazis. And so...
That sounds quite a strong thing to say.
Well, it's actually... What I'm saying here is, if you look at what this progressive mentality is doing in silencing people and deciding in their arrogance what people can and cannot say and what opinion they can and cannot have, you look at what the Nazis did, you look at what the communist Soviet Union did in terms of freedom of speech, and you'd show me the difference between them. There is none. And it's this self-deluded arrogance which goes like this: I am right, therefore anyone who says something different must therefore be wrong, and by definition, because they are wrong and I am right, their freedom of speech to be wrong doesn't need to be taken into account. That's how the mentality goes. What I say is, I don't agree with them, I don't agree with them, I don't agree with them. I do agree with them. But I don't want to silence any of them. Because are we so immature that we can't hear different opinions? Even those we don't like, sits back in amazement, horrified, call the police, and make our own judgments on what's being said and the validity of it. Do we not have the maturity to put forward another counter argument, which, if we are confident in what we're saying, will demolish that which we don't agree with. Anyone that wants to silence people rather than argue their case can't have much confidence in their own case, surely. And once you go down this road of giving authority the right to decide what can be said, what opinions can be had, you are in a tyranny, and that's where we're going now. But it's bigger than that, because it's not just political correctness. You can't say this, you can't say that, you must say that. It's also the fact that humanity has been hoaxed on a monumental scale in relation to freedom of expression and freedom of information. And it's been done out of an area that I call the devil's playground. It's better known as Silicon Valley. What's happened is, when you do the research, intelligence organizations like the CIA in the United States, the National Security Agency, and the Pentagon, through an organization called DARPA, the technological development arm of the Pentagon, they began seed funding technology and companies to develop what has become now known as the Internet, and an outgrowth of that, what became known as social media, and the search engine technology, which eventually became known as Google. All those were seed funded by this military intelligence network. And when they were selling it, because you can't show something's real face at the start, otherwise people will reject it and it won't get anywhere. You have to put another face to the world. So it was Google. Oh yeah, Google, yeah, we just go to search engine, we can find what we like, that's great, hey. And social media, oh, you post to your friends, you can say what you like, there's no censorship, isn't it great? And then it builds, and then it builds, and then it builds, and now you've reached a point now with Facebook where it claims 2.2 billion active users in a global population of 7.5 billion. You have this 90% monopoly on search engines, searches of Google. You have YouTube, which has got basically a monopoly on the posting of internet videos, which is owned by Google. And once this monopolistic situation was reached, then they started saying, okay, now we've got this much control, we're going to start deciding what you see and what you don't see. It's fishing line out. Oh, it ain't great? Yeah, right. Say what you like, you know, no censorship. Ooh, gotcha. And so we now have Facebook that is systematically censoring information outside of the official narrative. We have this situation with Facebook and Twitter now, which is known as ghost banning, which they do to me, which is you post it, but all the people that would like to see it, and I've liked or followed, would like to see it, they don't see it. Only a few of them see it. The vast majority don't see it because of ghost banning. They just don't circulate it. And you now have, as blatant as can be, is just YouTube deleting large and greater all the time numbers of channels that are presenting a different narrative to the official one in across the swathe of subjects that are just being deleted. They're just being deleted without any explanation. Just that you've broken our guidelines. What guidelines? Well, he's doing something different, something the same rather, and he's not breaking your guidelines. But oh, hold on a minute, he's saying the official narrative is true. And you were going to ask, why is it happening? Well, it's happening because I've been talking for 30 years and writing for 30 years. There are very few people control the world. Very few people. People will be staggered how few.
How many?
Well, I'm going to come to that in terms of it's fewer now than ever before. And why? But a lot of people have said in response to that, a few people can't control the world. There's too many people. It's not possible. Well, now we have a handful of people, which you could probably get on 10 fingers, or 2 hands, yeah, that control Google, control YouTube, owned by Google, control Facebook, that absolutely dominate the information that most people see or don't see. We have a concentration of power in Silicon Valley, a very small area of the world, that is the greatest concentration of surveillance and censorship power the world has ever seen. They can decide what you see and what you don't see, and they can trawl your data, in other words, the military intelligence community can, to find out the fine detail of your life from the information that you've posted on these various platforms. So that's what we're facing in terms of freedom of speech. It's disappearing. In fact, it doesn't exist. There is no freedom of speech. By the definition of freedom of speech is the freedom to speak your opinion and not have it censored and not have it banned